You ever just like totally zone out listening to the ocean? Or like when it's raining?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like instant
Yeah.
relaxation.
But what if sound could like affect us in ways we don't even realize?
Hmm, interesting.
Well, there's this patent from way back in 2000 by this guy, Hendrikus Luce,
Okay.
and it's all about something called, get this, subliminal acoustic manipulation of nervous systems.
Wow, that sounds kind of intense, like straight out of a movie or
I
something.
know, right? But it's a real patent. And we're gonna like break it all down in this deep dive.
Sounds good.
So Luce starts off talking about these things called sensory resonances. Basically, it's the idea that certain sound frequencies can trigger specific reactions in our bodies.
Huh?
And he's particularly interested in these two frequencies, zero point 0.5 hertz and 2.5 hertz.
Okay. I'm not super familiar with those, I gotta admit.
Yeah, so they're actually way lower than what we normally think of as sound, more like vibrations almost.
Ah, I see. Like we might not even consciously hear them.
Exactly. Luce thinks these low-frequency vibrations could be stimulating the vestibular nerve.
And that's the one in the inner ear, right?
Yeah.
The one that helps with balance and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's all happening below our conscious hearing level, we wouldn't even know what's going on.
So it's like subliminal messaging, but with sound instead of visuals.
Kinda, yeah. And the effects he describes are pretty wild. Let's start with zero point 0.5 hertz. Luce says this frequency can cause all sorts of things like drowsiness, relaxation.
Okay, makes sense. Kind of like those calming nature sounds we were talking about.
Right. But then it gets weird. He also claims it can cause a tonic smile.
A tonic smile. What even is that?
Yeah, I don't even know. And it doesn't stop there. It says zero point 0.5 hertz can also trigger stomach sensations, a feeling of pressure on your forehead, and even, wait for it, increased sexual arousal.
Well, hold on. Sound can do all that. I'm a little skeptical, I gotta say.
I hear you. It's a lot to take in for sure. It definitely challenges like everything we think we know about sound.
Right. And it's important to remember this is just one guy's patent. It's not like some, definitive scientific study or anything.
Totally. We definitely need to keep that in mind. So zero point 0.5 hertz is linked to relaxation and other stuff. What about 2.5 hertz? What's that one all about?
This one's even weirder, maybe. Luce thinks that 2.5 hertz can actually slow down certain brain functions. He even suggests this little test. Try counting backwards in your head from 100 to 70 with your eyes closed.
Okay.
Apparently, people exposed to 2.5 hertz take way longer to do it.
Huh. That's kind of freaky. Like the sound is messing with your concentration.
Yeah, exactly. And he also says 2.5 hertz can make you sleepy, dizzy, even disoriented.
Man, it's starting to sound like a weapon or something.
Yeah, it does make you wonder about the potential uses, both good and bad.
Definitely. But let's stick to the science for now. How does Luce explain all these different effects coming from specific frequencies?
He talks about something called an effective intensity window. Basically, he's saying that these subliminal effects only happen within a specific range of volume. Too quiet, and the sound doesn't reach your nervous system. Too loud, and your brain just blocks it out as noise.
So it's got to be like just right, like Goldilocks.
Huh, exactly. And that sweet spot probably varies from person to person, which could explain why some people might be more affected by these subliminal sounds than others.
Okay, so we've got these specific frequencies, this vestibular nerve thing, and this intensity sweet spot. But how would you actually deliver these subliminal sounds? Like, is he talking about headphones or what?
Well, Luce actually outlines a few different methods in his patent. The simplest one is using modified earphones, ones that are specifically designed to vibrate at these low frequencies.
Right, that makes sense. Anything else?
He also mentions using regular speakers, just like the ones we're using right now, actually.
Whoa, wait, are we subliminally manipulating our listeners right now?
Huh, no, don't worry. The frequencies Luce is talking about are way too low for our equipment to produce. But get this, the most interesting method he describes is using a pulse jet of air.
A jet of air. Okay, now that sounds like something out of a spy movie. How does that even work?
So imagine you have this focused stream of air, and it's being pulsed on and off really fast at a specific frequency.
Okay.
When that jet hits a surface, it creates these tiny changes in air pressure. Basically, sound waves, but in the subliminal range we're talking about.
Wow, that's wild. So instead of a speaker, it's like a tiny air cannon making the sound.
Pretty much. And Luce even points out that this air jet could also stimulate temperature receptors on your skin. So you might feel it as well as hear it, in a way.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. We've got sound sneaking in through our ears and maybe even our skin. But let's take a step back for a second and talk about the why. Why would anyone want to do this? What does Luce think this could be used for?
Well, he talks about a whole range of applications, everything from like personal relaxation aids and sleep improvement devices to more clinical uses like managing insomnia or anxiety. He even mentions the possibility of using it for, enhancing sexual arousal.
Huh. Okay. And of course, there's the potential for less savory applications too, right? Like using it as some kind of weapon to disorient people or something.
Definitely something to consider. But before we get too deep into the ethics of it all,
Mm.
curious, does Luce actually have any proof that his methods work? Did he do any experiments?
He does mention doing some experiments, yeah. Specifically, one focusing on that 2.5 hertz frequency and its effect on that backwards counting test we talked about.
Oh, right. So how did that work? What did he find?
Well, he used a loudspeaker to create the subliminal sound pulses
Hmm.
and then had people try to count backwards, both with and without earplugs, to see if blocking the sound made a difference. And according to him, the results showed that people took way longer to count when they were exposed to the 2.5 hertz sound. So he's saying he has data to back up his claims, but is that enough to convince the scientific community?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. Patents aren't held to the same standards as scientific publications, you know? They don't have to go through the same rigorous peer review process.
So the patent is interesting, but it's not necessarily the final word on the matter,
Exactly. It's more like a starting point.
which is exactly what we'll do in part 2 of this deep dive. We're going to explore what other researchers have discovered about the effects of low-frequency sound and infrasound, and whether there's any independent evidence to support Luce's claims. Stay tuned, folks. Things are about to get even more interesting. All right, so last time we were talking about that patent by Hendrikus Luce and all this crazy claims about sound frequencies and subliminal effects and stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty wild stuff. But
Yeah.
a patent isn't really like scientific proof or anything, so we figured we should dig a little deeper.
Right, like see what other research is out there.
Exactly. See if anyone else has found anything that, backs up Lou's ideas.
Oh, no.
And it turns out there's actually a whole lot of research on sound that we can't even hear.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's called infrasound. Sound waves with frequencies below 20 hertz. That's even lower than what Luce was talking about.
Huh. Okay, so what have they found?
Well, some studies have shown that being exposed to really loud infrasound can cause some strange effects, like dizziness and nausea.
Whoa. Seriously?
Yeah, and even anxiety and weird visual stuff. There's even a theory that infrasound might be behind those creepy feelings people get in, like haunted houses.
Oh, come on, you're not serious.
I'm totally serious. Think about it. That feeling like someone's watching you or the room suddenly getting cold. Some researchers think certain infrasound frequencies could actually, like, vibrate your eyeballs.
Vibrate your eyeballs. Ew, that's kind of gross.
I know, right? But think about it. It could create optical illusions, like seeing shadowy figures or movement out of the corner of your eye, all because of sound waves you can't even hear.
Okay, that's officially creepy. But is there any, actual evidence for this stuff?
Well, like with a lot of things in science, it's still kind of up in the air. Some studies have definitely shown that infrasound can make people feel uneasy or anxious, but it's not totally clear if that's a direct effect of the sound waves themselves.
Or if it's just, like, psychological, like our brain's freaking out because we don't know where the sound is coming from.
Exactly. Our brains are hardwired to respond to sound, even if we don't realize it. And since infrasound is often associated with, things like earthquakes or storms, our instincts might kick in and trigger a fear response.
That makes sense. It's kind of like when you hear nails on a chalkboard, it's not actually hurting you, but your brain just hates it.
Exactly. But let's get back to Luce's frequencies for a minute. 0.5 hertz and 2.5 hertz. What have researchers found about those?
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, there's definitely less research on those specific frequencies. But there are some interesting studies that suggest there might be something to it. Like, there's some evidence that frequencies around 0.5 hertz can actually affect your heart rate variability.
Heart rate variability, what's that?
It's basically the variation in time between your heartbeats.
Okay.
And it's actually a good thing. It shows that there's a good balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems.
The what and the what now?
Sorry. The sympathetic nervous system is like your fight or flight response.
Yeah.
And the parasympathetic is like your rest and digest response.
Yeah. Okay, so it's like a tug of war between those two systems.
Yeah, exactly. And heart rate variability shows us which one is winning. And some studies have shown that exposing people to 0.5 hertz vibrations can actually shift that balance towards a more relaxed state.
So it's like the sound is like telling your body to chill out.
Pretty much. So maybe Luce was onto something with his claim about 0.5 hertz inducing relaxation. But we definitely need more research to be sure.
Makes sense. What about 2.5 hertz? Any interesting findings on that one?
This is where things get even more out there. There's this growing field of research on brainwave entrainment.
I've heard of that. It's like using sound or light to change your brainwave patterns, right? Like using binaural beats to relax or focus or whatever.
Exactly. And while most of the research focuses on higher frequencies, some people think that very low frequencies, like 2.5 hertz, could maybe do the same thing.
So maybe Luce wasn't totally crazy when he said 2.5 hertz could slow down certain brain processes?
It's definitely an interesting idea. But it's important to remember that we're still in the very early stages of understanding how these low-frequency sounds might affect the brain. We need a lot more research before we can say for sure.
Fair enough. But it's exciting to think about the possibilities, right? Like imagine if we could actually use sound to change our brain waves.
Totally. It could completely change the way we treat mental health conditions, or even just help people focus better at work or school. But of course, like with any powerful technology, there's also the potential for misuse.
Right, like we've already talked about how this stuff could be used as a weapon. And even if it's used for good, there are still ethical questions to consider.
Absolutely. Like, if we can influence people's moods and behavior without them knowing, where do we draw the line? Who gets to decide what's beneficial and what's not?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely a slippery slope. But before we get too deep into the ethics of it all, I think we need to address the big question.
Yeah.
Is any of this stuff actually real? Can Luce's methods really work the way he says they do?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to answer that, we need to take a closer look at the evidence, or lack thereof, for Luce's claims.
Okay, so we've spent like 2 whole parts now talking about this Hendrikus Luce guy and his subliminal sound stuff. But the big question is, does it actually work?
Right. Like, can you really change how people feel and act just by playing some super low sounds they can't even hear?
Exactly. That's what we got to figure out. And honestly, after digging through all the research, it's still kind of a mystery.
Yeah. Luce did some experiments of his own, sure, but the details in his patent are pretty limited.
Like, we don't even know for sure how he set up his tests or what kind of results he got.
Right. And remember, patents aren't like scientific papers. They don't go through peer review or anything. So other scientists haven't had a chance to, check his work and make sure it's legit.
So it's kind of like he's claiming to have this amazing recipe, but he won't tell anyone how to actually bake the cake.
Uh-huh. Yeah. We need other researchers to try and replicate his experiments, see if they get the same results.
Makes sense. Without that, it's hard to say for sure if Luce's methods actually work or if maybe there's another explanation for what he saw.
Right. Like, maybe it's just the placebo effect. If people believe that a certain sound is going to make them feel relaxed, they might just subconsciously relax themselves.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Our minds are powerful things.
Totally. But even if Luce is right, even if subliminal sound manipulation really does work, there's still a lot of big questions to answer. Well, for starters,
Yeah.
what are the ethical implications? Like, is it okay to influence people's behavior without them knowing?
Right, right. That's a slippery slope for sure.
And who decides what's beneficial? Like, is it okay to use this stuff to, I don't know, make people more productive at work? Or to make them like certain products?
Whoa, yeah, that's getting into some Black Mirror territory right there.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's scary to think about. But it's important to have these conversations now before this technology becomes, widespread.
Absolutely. So what do we do? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the most important thing is more research. We need scientists to really dig into this stuff and figure out if it works, how it works, and what the potential risks and benefits are.
Makes sense. And we also need to have some serious discussions about the ethics of it all.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like, how do we make sure this technology is used responsibly? How do we protect people from being manipulated?
Yeah, those are big questions. And honestly, I don't know if we have all the answers yet.
Me neither. But I think it's important to at least start asking the questions.
I agree. So it seems like our deep dive into subliminal sound manipulation has left us with more questions than answers. But hey, isn't that what makes this stuff so fascinating?
Totally. There's still so much we don't know about the brain and about how sound can affect us. And who knows what amazing discoveries are waiting to be made.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. Big thanks to our expert for joining us and sharing all this mind-blowing info.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in and joining us on this deep dive into the world of subliminal sound. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
Definitely.
And hey, if you're interested in learning more, there are tons of resources available online. Just be sure to be critical of what you read and always do your own research.
Good advice.
And remember, sound is a powerful force. It can heal, it can inspire, and yes, it can even manipulate. So be aware of the soundscape around you. And who knows, maybe you'll even discover some hidden powers of your own.
Now that would be cool.
Until next time, folks, stay curious.